All right. So, Brandon Hayes, excited for you to be here. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's been a pretty good day overall for it. Went out riding, been taking care of a dog, and then and then now I'm here.
Cool. Which dog are you taking care of?
Actually, Caitlin's dog, she's just gone for the day,
Oh,
gone for 2 days or so, and so Austin and I have just been looking after her small dog, which has been like really easy.
yeah. I know we talked a little bit earlier about your bike ride, but you said you didn't, or you said you went to Ward, and is this part of your training ride?
Yeah, a little bit. I think my goal is to. There's like two kind of ways of doing it, or two things that I need to do. One is like an increasing distance, and then the other is to like get comfortable doing like longer elevation rides is my goal. And so Ward is nice because it's short distance, like close to the border, but then you just go up to the peak to peak highway, and so it's like, I don't know, like 4,500 feet to get to the top of there. And so it's like there's like the elevation kind of side of things, and then eventually I'll go back and try to just work on getting used to doing high distance than anything else.
Is this like mid-season for your training?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I have like a month and a half left from things before it officially kind of starts. I think I'm at the point where it would be easy to, not easy, but I would finish, I think, for it. It's just now it's getting to the point where how can I get myself to be more comfortable, like by the time I hit the end, and not just be like totally wiped out or like totally exhausted. And so it's kind of figuring that, like things like that. And so actually I was chatting with Nicholas a bit because it's been useful to hear how, like, what do you do for your diet, or like how do you like keep your energy up when you do like the long distance kind of rides for it. And that's the thing that I like just don't do well with overall. And so it's kind of figuring out what's the best like setting for me to be able to like keep maintaining what you're doing and then not feel exhausted or like tired by the time that you get to the end of everything.
And when you say long distance, are these like century rides?
Eventually for the, like, usually I'll go between 50 and like 70 miles for things, and then like anything over 50 is usually when I need to like pay a little bit more attention to like, what am I bringing with me, and like, do I have enough food, or do I have enough like supplies, and like just like electrolytes or water for things. And then I need to be concerned. And then when it pushes up to 100, then it's totally doable to do without that consideration. But then it's like me going to Kathmandu at the end because I got wiped out. I was there, so hopefully avoiding that in the future.
Yeah, I think when you say like diet and like what you're putting into what you're putting into your body and what you're feeling with is very important. Like, I mean, I personally don't ride that long. Like, you know, the other week I did a triathlon part of it, and I did the bike portion. And even afterwards, it was only like a quarter century or so, maybe like 24 miles. I was like, oh, this is tough. Like, I'm ready to eat, right? So I can only imagine, like, if you're going really long, like 100-mile plus or like multi-day, like what kind of nutrition you would need for that. You know?
Yeah, I think the answer that I was given is like, you need something that's kind of like your body's going to absorb slowly over time, and so like more complex like nutrients. And then, but if you only do that, then you're not in a great position for what you're burning immediately for it. And so it's like having that core layer, and then also having this layer of just like I don't know, easy sugars or something for your body to kind of consume as you're going for things. But I'm not an expert in that area, so that's my that's like me also kind of figuring out what works for me, and like how can you have like both of those layers and like be consuming things over time, and then like slow release as well if you're doing like long distance kind of stuff.
That's fair. For like a long distance ride for you, like, is there typically something that you like gravitate towards in terms of like fueling with?
Just like, honestly, just like bars if I'm there for like a really long time for stuff. And then also I think having like just like, right, even like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, to be honest, is like enough like calories overall. It's just gonna take a long time to digest. And so usually what I'll do is I'll go like out for something, and then like whenever before I would turn around would be just like a lunch spot or something, and then just like having that pause and like enough time to just like refuel and like re-energize a little bit to last you for when you come back for things. But like timing that pause, or like only eating at that pause, is usually what I've been doing, and that's not been the greatest feeling, because then it's like you might consume some energy here, but you're like already on your way back, and so you won't really process it until you're already back, and by that time you like feel kind of bad for this like last leg of the journey that's there.
No, that's fair. It like some of these foods that are pretty extreme, like Coca-Cola, or like chips, or like full burritos, right? For long endurance races, that is, right? And I think to me that could make sense, right? Because you're running all day. You are missing full meals, so I guess like why not go to an aid station and get yourself a full burrito, right?
Yeah, the Coca-Cola is funny, because then like one of the like biking trips that I did, people would swear by it, where it's like if you're having a really bad day, just like having like one Coca-Cola like just like fully rejuvenates you for the next hour, and then that was how you would go from like point A to point B if you were feeling really bad. And so I haven't tried it myself, but it's like funny how you could just do something so simple like that and then have that energy fuel you for like, I don't know, 20 miles or 30 miles until you get to the next location that's there.
Yeah, like I've seen aid station that were serving like Monster energy drinks and like coffee as you're going, and I'm like, oh, okay, like maybe some people can take that, right? Maybe they need more of a stimulant, but you're already doing something that's very stimulating. So it's like, do the two added together make it something that's like overbearing for somebody?
I don't know. Yeah, I think energy drinks and coffee are like the two things that I haven't really gotten into at all, and so I don't know. I'm assuming, I guess that caffeine rush maybe would be like a push to like kind of finish things out, but I don't think I would do well if I like just all of a sudden had Monster on a race and then like start continuously running.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So I'm really interested in asking about like the really long distance rides. I know that you've done like a long distance across America for your bike ride there. Like what is the process to do that, to start?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think like when I first was signing up for things, I think that I was more I think I viewed it as intimidating, for it's like, right, it's like you know how many miles you have to go from like for instance, for the one that I did, you know how many miles you have to go from like one side of the United States to the other side of the United States. That's there, and then that roughly that takes, I don't know, anywhere between 2 to 3 months, or if people that are really fast, you could do it even faster. But like most people, somewhere between like 2 to 4 months would be like the best timing for it. And so I think for me, the biggest mindset change is I think my biggest thing is if you have like a base kind of like level, like if you have biked before, then it's more comfortable because you're going from point A to point B, and maybe it's like 50 miles. But then it's like, instead of thinking of it as I have this whole 3-month journey, it's kind of breaking it up and saying I have this whole 3-month journey, but really tomorrow I'm just biking 40 miles or 50 miles from Cleveland to Columbus or something like that. And so then it becomes more manageable, because I think like, and that was the case for me, is like you stop looking at it as, oh, I'm like so far from my end destination, and it just becomes like a part of the journey of you making it to your next like day's location, and then your life really becomes simpler at the end of the day. And so it's just like all of the effort is you going from A to B in just like one day that's there, and then the next day comes, and then you figure out what you're doing the next day that's there. And so I think that was the key like mindset change that I had, I think, of like viewing it, where it shifted from being more like anxious and to being something that's more fun and just like more enjoyable along the way.
Did you always want to do it?
No, I didn't. I probably wouldn't have done it if like there's a few things that kind of like lined up in the same time. One of the things was, so I only heard about it through a friend that my brother and I grew up with, actually, that we swam with. He did this trip when he was in I think he was ending grad school, or he was starting grad school, I think. But like we would see him back at home, and then I like saw all of his pictures, and he was kind of explaining what he did for one of the summer times, and so that kind of had it on my radar for a little bit. But it wasn't necessarily something that I thought like, oh, I like want to sign up for this or do this the next time. And it wasn't until I first got to Colorado and then didn't have funding for like one of my summer times and was trying to like figure out what I was doing here and like, am I leaving here or am I staying here for things? And so because I didn't have funding then, it seemed like a good opportunity to do this trip instead, and just like do something totally different than what I normally would have done. And so that was kind of like the main driving factor for it. And then also just like the charity cause for it for like young adults with cancer was like also something that I was like more like motivated by, and just something that had more of an interest, where it's like you're not just biking across the country, you get to like stop at these random places or like meet random people along the way and then hear other people's stories and then just like kind of like share throughout the process. And so that I think kind of appealed to me as well.
That's really cool. So when you got to Colorado, you weren't sure about funding, and as a part of that, maybe you saw like an opportunity to go on the bike ride, and you just said like, well, might as well get.
It was in the last year. There was an age cutoff for it, so because it's supposed to be geared towards like young adults either that have had cancer in some form or as like have like relations to that, and that's like that was the charity's kind of like main push for things. And then how does that like change people's lives and how does it like affect everything? And so but as a result, I think 25 or 26 I want to say was like the upper age gap that was there. And so that was also why I did it during that summer, where it's like, well, I'm reaching kind of the upper level that's there. So if I wanted to sign up through this specific trip, then it made the most sense to do in that first summer that I had in Colorado.
And so it's specifically for 18 through 24 and no other age categories?
College age is kind of the criteria for it. And so like you can still do it in like the beginning parts of grad school for stuff, but then it's just like a different demographic and different, I think, like focus group for it, where it's like probably like there's some other like charity adventure, like cycling kind of stuff. One is called Bike with MS, and they do various things, but they also do like a cross country ride, and then we overlapped with them a lot on our trip over the times, but their age gap is not existent. And so you would have people that are like anywhere from 18 to like 85 that's there, and like very different experience having like that wide age range than it is having everyone be kind of in the same life stage that's there. And so I think that's the point is kind of having for it, where it's like sometimes it's nice to have like this like grouping of people that kind of have this shared life stage that they're in, and then doing this adventure together that's there.
Yeah, and it's cool that you're saying that it's for a cause, like for a charity, and not just like it gives it more of a purpose. Yeah, so that's really cool. Where was your guys' start point?
Yeah, so Baltimore, Maryland was the kind of starting destination, and then ending destination was Seattle, Washington.
Okay, so it's not a full like coast to coast ride.
Yeah, I don't know. Would you consider that the East Coast?
Yeah, I guess like to me, I would just think of like New York, okay, right, to California, right, as coast to coast.
Yeah, I see what you're saying for. So there's three rides that you could have picked for it. One is like the quote unquote like, and just in general cycling across the United States, there's like a northern route, and usually people will go. Yeah, like New York, Baltimore is usually the starting destination, and then the ending destination is somewhere like Oregon, or usually it's Washington, and then like there's a middle route that goes across the United States, and then you start in the same location, but then your ending destination might be Oregon, and then the southern route would be like your ending destination is California. That's there, and so that is like just what's setting, I guess, the direction that you're heading and like where you're starting from things.
Yeah. Baltimore to Seattle, that's such a long distance. Like how many days or how many months does this take overall?
Yeah, like three-ish is is at least what we did for it. And I think kind of like one of your first questions was like, how do you kind of like manage or like think about things that are like that? It was interesting because I was a little bit of a cyclist beforehand. I like did some triathlon stuff growing up and then took a long break from that and then restarted up training when I applied for like this kind of the Almond Foundation bike ride time frame. 3 months. And then the thoughts that I was going for was that you didn't have to be a cyclist to sign up for to like do the trip for it. And so it's like you could, if you had your starting destination there, you would very quickly spend like 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then kind of get up to speed that's there. And so it's like 3 months journey, but then spaced such a way that you don't have to be a pro cyclist in order to actually complete the ride that's there.
Oh, that's really cool. So you don't need to be a part of any clubs or have prior history with cycling. You can just join in any group so long as you fit under that age group range. Yep,
definitely helpful to like if you have like biked before or like are used to things. It makes your life easier, but at the end of the day, it's like everyone's butt's gonna hurt after like the first week or like the first, and even throughout most of it, but like especially the first 2 weeks of like really getting used to being on the road for that long. And so like everyone is having those types of shared experiences. It just depends on the degree for it. And so if you like started from zero, it's probably a harder time to adjust for it than if you started from something that you already were a cyclist that was there. And so that's why I think like mindset was like key. I think for me for it, where it's like having that shifting mindset was what made the trip kind of become more manageable and more doable. And it wasn't like it wasn't as much of like a physical ability as it was of just like how do you view like the journey that you're on and how do you view like that whole like coast to coast trip.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt it the day after, like my triathlon. I was like, oh, what is this?
Oh yeah, so for sure.
It's not like working your muscle sore.
Yeah,
it's like soreness because of the seat.
Yeah,
right, and your sit bone.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I think a lot of times people assume that if you are like a cyclist for a really long time that goes away, and I think the answer is that it really doesn't. What goes away is you get used to it a little bit, and then it becomes just more manageable. And so it's something that's just like you expect, and like isn't something that's like really like making you feel bad during the day.
So that's great to hear that you like don't have to be a pro cyclist in order to do this like journey here. Talking about like managing logistics like throughout, it's because it's 3 months time, right? That's a long time, right? So logistics in terms of like food and like shelter, was the logistics really difficult to like uphold for such a long period of time?
It would have been if it was a solo ride, I think, for it, because it was the group ride and this charity ride. They kind of take care of that behind the scenes that's there. And so it's like there's like an app called Ride with GPS, and so like your day one route from Baltimore to Pennsylvania or somewhere in Pennsylvania, let's say, like that whole trip is already pre-planned by someone. And so it's like you don't have to worry about that logistic. And then the only logistics that then we're concerned about is like making sure like your group is there, and then it's transportation wise, because there's like 2 support vans that's there. And so one grouping is then going to be asking for like food donations, that way you don't have to like kind of use any of the money that was raised for it, and so all of the money can go back to the charity foundation. And so that was the hardest logistics, is trying to figure out like just like how can you get food for 30 people and like donated food for 30 people. And like if you're in a big city like Pittsburgh, or if you're in a big city like Cleveland or Columbus, easier because there's so many options that are available. But if you're in somewhere like Montana, then your options are a lot less. And so it can be hard to do that. Housing wise, actually, that was also taken care of by the organization. And so we stayed at like mostly churches, and like usually it was mostly churches or Catholic churches or Protestant churches. And then like usually there was like religious aspects to them, just because they had a lot of space for it, and they were also very like kind of like welcoming to having these communities come in. And so then that church community a lot of times would like prepare dinner for us, and so then that would also be the opportunity of like meeting new people in the community, and then like you would hear their stories, they would hear your stories for the timing that was there. And so I think that was one of the kind of like best parts, I think, of that whole experience, was coming into these different communities and like just hearing what other people are chatting about, and like what like why do they want to meet you, and like vice versa for things too. And so I think that was the neatest part of everything.
Are these have these people like hosted before, and is that why they're so open to...
Yeah, sometimes there's definitely like a few groupings whereas like they're like super hosts a little bit, right? Whereas like they've hosted for the last 10 years. So they know what to expect. They usually have a strong like community behind it, where it's like, oh, this grouping is going to like bring in this food for it. And then they like come together and also provide like some bike repair stuffs, and like people from the community might be hosting some riders at their house to have like a bed. And so that wasn't as common, but you could tell when you were entering a community like that, because it was just like the like hospitality was like amazing that was there, and just like shocking too, of just like how open and like welcoming people were in those areas.
Yeah, just like having a place to sleep at night. Maybe they have some food for you too. That's really amazing for like such a long trip, where like there's a lot of things that can happen. Yeah. And especially too, like you said earlier, you had two support vans there. You said one was for repair and the other one was probably like medical or something like that.
Yeah, one was for basically finding food and like providing lunch right for the day that's there, and then the other one is more the logistics of how do you get like one of the things that made the trip and what I've learned recently is that doing it solo would be much harder, because you're carrying all of your stuff with you that's there. And so like the speed difference between carrying stuff with you versus not was much bigger than I thought it was going to be. And so that would have been really hard. And so one of the van's role was to just stockpile everyone's bags and things, and then take off to the next destination. And like that usually was a church. And so you're in the next church unpacking the bags that's there. And then that van would be finding food donations. And then the second van would be like the support van. If someone broke down, or like someone needed help, or like something happened along the way, they would be the ones that would be helping out in that sense.
Yeah, like some people don't think about this stuff, right? Because it's like a lot of it is what ifs, and a lot of it is kind of difficult to think that long term in advance. Like I know when I was younger, like I had my buddy and I in high school, maybe like two buddies, we were going to go across the US. We were planning to go across the US, and we're like, okay, food, right? What do you want to do for food? Okay, let's get canned food from the store, right? Like no support, no vans, nothing, right? It's just us. I was like, that is the worst idea. Looking back at it now that I can think of it, like we're not just going to go eating cans of beans across like the Pacific Northwest, that's just scary.
Yeah. How loaded can we get before we, before we make it weight wise?
Yeah. So I think like the way that you guys are doing it is really great, because you have like a full team effort behind it, and safety aspects, just like having places planned to stay at night is really great, right? Just not having to worry about that. So like for you guys, when you're riding through the route there, was there any like sketchy portions of the ride? Like were there like shoulders that were like super tight on the highway?
Yeah, especially at the beginning, there's a couple places. There was a few places at the beginning where there just was, you're like climbing up a hill and there's not a big shoulder. And so if you're used to road riding, or like used to having like semi trucks pass you, it's okay, but it's like it's an unnerving experience a little bit that's there. And then the other thing that is sometimes sketchy is like the mountain passes are beautiful, but they have their own types of like dangers and adventures that's there. And so like very beginning on the trip was like going down the Appalachian Mountains, and then I was a van driver that day. But it's kind of wild when you hear people coming down and saying they hit like 45 on a bike, or you hit like 55 on a bike, or you're like passing a car that's going down, and it's like, well, it's like, he's like, you can go fast. But it's like, if something happens, or like, so you hit a rock, or like something, an animal jumps out in front of you, it's like, those are things that you just can't necessarily anticipate for, and are like inherently dangerous. And it's like, and I think that was one of the things that people became aware of really fast in the trip, where it's like, it's easy to kind of have it in the back of your mind that like, it's like, it's kind of dangerous to bike on the side of the road in general. Normally you're okay, like everyone was okay on the trip that I did for it, but like that's not all the case. And so there's like one year where someone did get hit, and like someone did die from like that experience that was there. And so like that becomes like part of the trip, where you have like these remembrance days for like people like that. And like that was like a one kind of, not one off, but it's like the stuff like that can happen for it. And so I think it's like the reminder of what you're doing is actually dangerous that's there. And especially in like certain states that's there, like for instance Washington, doing like being an Olympic National Park, it also is like a heavy logging area. And so having like logging trucks pass like groups of bikers is like, sometimes there's enough space, but sometimes it's pushing it on the space that's there. And so then it's just like, how do you minimize your risk that you're taking, is I think is kind of like the name of the game overall.
That's so unnerving. Just like in my mind, like just riding next to a huge semi truck on the highway. Oh my gosh, like there's so much risk there.
I agree with you. Usually it's not preferred, and usually what people do is like, if you're riding in a group, especially whoever's in the back, right, will like call out if the semi truck is passing, because even if they give you space, like you will feel the effect of them like driving, especially if they're going over 50, you'll feel the effect of them like passing you on the road. And so it took a bit to get used to.
Are you okay with like riding on the highway?
I am, and I think mainly like usually you want to do full highways, but like in Montana, like a back road could be like 65 or 70 even in some places. The reason that I think I'm more okay with it is because that is actually a lot of the riding that I did in Rochester, New York when I was an undergrad, where you had to be on these kind of like somewhat fast back roads before you would hit the country land, and like people are speeding on those. And so like having like pretty large trucks be passing me was something that I think I got a little bit used to. Still, it's like you don't feel comfortable, but just like you kind of know what to expect a little bit, or maybe you'll be like hugging more inwards in the road than like what you would do normally if you didn't have people doing like passing you consistently that's there. And so it's just like a different mentality that's there, but it's probably best to always be safer than it is to be pushing it.
Now, when you were going through, were there any like sketchy interactions with people throughout the trip?
Surprisingly no, actually. There are some like odd folks per se that was there, but it's like those were usually the people that were the most memorable, to be honest, and like most interesting to meet and like hear their stories and talk to overall for it. I think because we always had places to stay, in terms of just like feeling unsafe with just like who's around you, I don't think was as prevalent. Bike packing and like having your own stuff and maybe needing to stop at like someone's house, or like needing to knock at like a random stranger's door, and that I think is when it can get a little bit more unsafe. Or like if you needed to like couch surf or like do that kind of stuff, is I think when like the people safety aspects I would like think about. But because your end destination was a church, it was kind of the stereotype of like, oh, the church people are probably going to be really nice and welcoming, even if I'm going over to this stranger's house and sleeping in their bed. There, it's like, it's probably going to be okay. And so you kind of, I guess I kind of took that for granted a little bit, where you like that assumption was usually made if this community is hosting you, that like you don't have to be as concerned with the groupings that was there. I will say there was one, I guess I take that back. There was one grouping, I didn't necessarily feel unsafe there, but it was a rural area that did have like people that were like a little bit more vocal on like the more like white supremacy side of things. And so you would like hit that occasionally in some like really rural, far out towns. Did they make me feel, and like people on the, they did make some people on the team feel unsafe, but it wasn't, they weren't threatening per se, but it was very clear that their viewpoints like were in this class where you're like don't want to ask more questions, or you don't want to really know like what their thoughts are, and then are kind of excited to leave for the next day that was there. And so I think that happened once. And that was the only thing that I would say was like a kind of a sketchy interaction overall.
Yeah, I asked that because you're going across so many states and you're seeing so many different cultures and people. You know, the chances are that you run into like a bad apple are probably high. And yeah, no, like we've had family members that host before, bikers coming through. Like we had once I heard they had hosted a guy from Germany, and they were riding through California, and he was like an older guy, and he had like lost his hearing aids or something, or they weren't working, and so they like spent all night helping him like fix his hearing aids. And so like those are like the real trail angels, if you will, that are like here to help you and like, you know, serve you, but you know, at the end of the day, it's strangers, right? And so like you don't know them that well, and so like anything can go wrong. Or like I've heard in the past, like going through a through hike, which is just like hiking for a long distance, from, you know, North to South America or South to Northern America. Like there's been some guy that's like running fugitive like along the Appalachian Trail there, and he's just trying to escape the law.
Yeah, I've heard
so
that
like
too.
so that's one of like the sketchier stories there.
Yeah, I think to that extent, like the white supremacist one was probably the worst person that we've encountered for it. But it's funny because I think a lot of the time it's like tolerance in the community. And so it's like sometimes if you're in a really like rural, like niche, small community there's not a lot of options to like meet other people that are different beyond the community that's there. And I think that was one of my takeaways a little bit from the trip, and partly why it was probably interesting to have like us come in, where it's like everyone's coming from a little bit of a different background, and then like chatting with these people that maybe like they don't have that option of just like right we're in Boulder, it's pretty homogenous, but you can go to Denver for things, and then meet like some more different types of people that's there. But if you're in, I don't know, a super rural community, you might not have access to be able to have that quite as much. And then like how do you become tolerant of like different groupings of people without having exposure to like those groupings that's there? And I think that was one of like kind of a message that I kind of took away from the trip a little bit, and it kind of exemplified why it's important to like be meeting people from like all different types of backgrounds and like have those experiences. And I'm sure you might like not agree with some of their backgrounds or like some of their viewpoints that's there, but then just like having the tolerance for someone for who they are, or like living the way that they are for it. I think it was like a interesting like takeaway, I think, from the trip that I maybe didn't think was going to be quite as like hit home by visiting all these different communities along the way.
And so for that group there that challenged you, the supremacy group, did they like have interactions with your group there?
Just one person. Like there was really only one person that was vocal, that was there, and like vocal on like his white supremacy viewpoints, and then vocal on like misogyny that was there. And so it's like, and it wasn't like, it was like, what do you say to someone that like says that to you? It's like, I've never really encountered that situation before. And so it's like, I don't it's like, I don't know. It's like, how do you respond? And like in people, what ended up happening is you don't enable what someone's saying for it. That's there. It's like, if they're gonna like talk their stuff, it's like, sure, like I'm gonna let them talk, that's there, and then not engage for those like specifically those conversations that are there. And it's like, because sometimes you can't engage, but then it's like, are you are you really doing anything? And like, what it's like, what do you, where it's like, it's like you're not going to change someone's mind at the end of the day. A lot of times that's there. And so like having conversations is important, that's there, but it's like also, it's like, when do you have a conversation versus when to know not to have a conversation with someone. For our case, because we're only there for a day, if you like encountered that, it was fine to not have a conversation, because you're probably not going to see the person in an hour or 2 hours that's there. And it's easy to kind of let that kind of pass in the background.
Yeah, I think when somebody has like a opinion or a stance and they're firm with it, I think that's okay. But if that, you know, position or stance is very like hurtful to somebody else, and trying to like drive that down their throat, I think that's very like difficult position to be in. And so like hopefully that didn't happen in this trip here. It sounded like it didn't. It sounded like it was just passing by.
Yeah, it was. And like we were just very we were transient overall, and so it's like it's hard. It is hard like that. Usually if someone does have a viewpoint that maybe conflicts, like at the end of the day, most people aren't open, like most people aren't immediately confrontational. That's there. And so it's like, even if you know there's a difference that's there, it's like if you know you're only going to see someone for 2 hours or just have dinner with someone, usually it's like you'd rather have that common topic area that you're going to talk about and not something that you thought was like sensationalized or something that maybe wouldn't go over well with certain people. And then like as you talk to people more and you get to know more about them, then you get the feeling, you can then kind of try and tell like, oh, is this someone that I will like go into a deeper conversation or like have a more like intriguing conversation with, or are you gonna stick to like the like safe topics? I mean, I think the bigger thing, like it's like the like bike tripping lessons, I think I kind of liked, or like tolerance of like different groupings and like things that's there as like something that I think I value more so, I think, overall, especially like becoming like going into Boulder for things, and like was one of the things that I think I was actually most surprised about of coming to Boulder specifically, of just like it's like it's one of those things where it's like Boulder is characterized as like it's like a super liberal mecca for things, but then you actually like have like a lot of like homogeneity kind of throughout like different thoughts that's there, and like even kind of like if you aren't in like a very specific thought, you kind of get like cast aside a little bit that's there. And so I think that's been like like that's kind of like direction and like talk area has been like things that I've valued, and just like meeting people from like different backgrounds, and just and it could be from like a religious background through like GCF a little bit for things, or it could be through like I don't know, through like the sports side of things, or just like running into people that like aren't running into those circles that's there, but like have different perspectives and like viewpoints on like how they go about life in general for things.
And so just like getting the opportunity to be in different friend groups or meeting different people is like helpful for like the sort of that growth mindset there. Yeah,
I think that has been kind of like a more like thing that I think been kind of trying to realize and like focused on more so is like how do you maintain having like a growth mindset kind of like throughout your life, even when you move from like from Ohio to Rochester to Oregon to like New Mexico and then to Colorado for things, and like everything has been like there's similarities that's there, but like also some like stark differences between things, or like living in like places like Boulder and like Los Alamos, or things that are like are affluent and like have that wealth that's there. And then it's like, do you see like the wealth imbalance like throughout like just your normal experience? And like for me the answer was usually no, because if I'm in like the university sector, it's like easy to kind of forget about like what exists and like what other people's realities are for things. In Los Alamos the answer was it was more apparent actually there than any of the other places that I've lived. And so I think that was something that was like my takeaway of just like how do you it's like it's easier to just like not realize something's going on than it is to kind of like dig deeper and realize that it's like there are some like issues in like every single place that's there. And then how can you go about like your normal life, and then also like be a part of those communities and like be a part of like those groupings, and trying to just like recognize that's there, and or help, but it's like that's sometimes hard to get to.
That's fair. And Los Alamos being New Mexico, is that right?
Yep.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, the disparity is like wealth disparity, like specifically, can be very apparent, and it's difficult to see sometimes, like in person, like, being in a bubble, right? Like, is difficult to see that because you're seeing everybody around you, like they're doing okay, they're not they're not on the streets or anything, they don't have mental troubles, mental illness, or like drug addictions, or like being homeless, right? But then when you get out of that bubble a little bit, or you travel to a different place like Los Alamos, or I don't know, maybe Los Angeles, for example, right, where it's like really apparent in your face, and it's like, wow, like other people are living like this. Like, I'm really happy for the things that I have and the opportunities I have, and like just being aware in general of like the existence of like disparity, I think is important for you personally in growth, and like just having empathy for other people. Yeah. And so like in your time in Los Alamos, this is for work?
An internship, yeah. But I think it was like it was interesting because New Mexico is one of the I guess I don't know the full statistic for it, but it's definitely not. It's rated low in like standards for like wealth, and like standards for like specifically education. Actually is where you noticed it a little bit more, except for like pockets within the community that's there. So for instance, like Los Alamos has like the lab, so it's this like super educated like wealth concentration within the state overall that's there. But then when you travel to some different areas, then you just kind of see how people have like less means and like less resources to like to do their life, and it's like, then it's like, what does that set you up when you don't have quite the same amount of resources in order to get to like the next location, or like in order to like achieve like specific goals. And I think for sometimes, like that's something that I've kind of tried to become a little bit more aware of for just like becoming a grad student, and then like taking on people as like that I'm going to mentor throughout time. It's like sure, it's great to mentor a bunch of different like types of people and like different groups of people that's there, but it's also nice to like go to middle schools and like help out in areas where maybe people don't see science or like engineering or math as something that they like can do or like have access to, that's there, and getting exposure to that's there. And I think that's been something that I've tried to push a little bit more on for like my time here, of just like understanding where the differences are, and then trying to like meet people for where they're at, and then like how can you help like elevate more than anything else.
That outreach, is that something that's really like important to you?
Yeah, I think like Austin started it for things, and then it's been, I think, really nice just to have that be part of things that I'm doing here. And it's like, because it's like when we went to one of the middle schools, it's like one of the topic areas is just, it's like, it's surprising how much stems from, maybe not surprising, but there are a lot stems from kind of your environment and your culture, and like even your parents. Whereas if your parents are telling you that math is hard, right, then it's like you're a little less likely to go into something like that, because that's your bias, and like your kind of bias behind things that's there. And so how do you kind of overcome those biases? It's like you can have people come in and try to like talk to people and like kind of give an understanding, or just have like a different viewpoint on what it's like to do something that's in math that's there. And it's like, well, it's like even if you think it's hard, it's like it's still something that could be a potential opportunity, not something to discount that's there. And I think that has been something that I've kind of like liked being engaged in. And like how can you help out like the next groupings of people, and like changing their perspectives and how they see things.
And this is like specifically towards the STEM, right?
Specifically towards STEM in this case, where it has been like the main things that I've just kind of had the opportunity of being involved with, because that's just what ends up lining up with things. But like a lot of that happened in Rochester too, where it's just here's like the opportunity to just like talk to young children, or like talk to kids, or go to a science museum, or like a museum in general. And then just like, how do you get someone engaged in I don't know if you actually change someone's trajectory or not for it, but it's just like giving that perspective, and like giving that idea where it's like this is like what something looks like, that's there, and then it's like, don't discount it for yourself if that's something that you're like interested in. It's like, go for it, or like learn more about like something that if it's your interest overall.
Yeah, and so essentially it's just providing opportunity for people maybe otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. And like, even though like you're saying, sort of like if it's you don't know what their home life is like, and you don't know what obstacles they're going through, but at least you can offer just an opportunity to learn about something new, or like a potential path that you could go down, and maybe it'll elevate your life rather than do harm to it through this STEM outreach. I think that's really, really cool. Now, were there any like point along the trip that you like sort of felt homesick at all, like because it's just such a long period of time?
Yeah. It's gonna be sound bad. Not as much, no? To be honest.
Fair. That's fair.
I think no, I think because I was so like before I did the trip, I was kind of transitioning out of undergrad, and then I did an internship in Los Alamos, and so I was kind of on the move, to be honest. Like Boulder wasn't it wasn't a place that I would have said was my home at that time, and so because of that, I think I didn't have this like homesickness or like need of like wanting to be back in Boulder, because this trip, to be honest, was my escape from like things, and so it's like that was important to me, and like having access to just like not having to worry about the things that were going back on in Boulder, or just like that section of my life that was there. And so because of that was like, it was a nice feeling to just like not have to worry about things that was there.
Yeah, just trying something new, right? Trying something challenging, and sort of having like a new place to go, and having new places to go, and new people to see. That's very exciting. Yeah, no, that's a very valid answer. And was this transition, or was this bike ride once again transitioning from like working to graduate, or was it like undergrad to graduate?
It was doing so I guess I would have been in graduate school. It was the end of the first year, but it was kind of the transition point of finishing undergrad, and then I did an internship in Los Alamos, and then it was that transition point into grad school, like TAing and figuring out like what lab am I going to be in, am I going to have funding for things, and then and then it was like that gap in that summer to resetting for the second year of being in Boulder.
Yeah, so that's fair. What did it feel like to finish?
It was nice. It was definitely like, as you go throughout the trip, like the beginning, it feels long because you realize how much distance you have, and then when you get to the middle, like you're still kind of getting up to speed for things. You've like gotten into a groove with how you're doing things, and then I think once it gets like 3/4 to the end, you're pretty much set. Like you know what to expect for each day. You know kind of how things are being. It's like each day is still a different adventure, but you know that you're like physically able to complete things and like kind of continue with the process. And so that, I think, is when you start to, instead of counting up, you're now like counting down the thing days and like the miles that you have left. And I think that's like a different mindset change for it. And so like it was like sad to like have that kind of journey and that whole life phase and like grouping people that I was with be finished up that was there. Yeah, I mean, mixed feelings, right, for it, because it's like it's a long adventure. So I'd be lying if I said I part of me wasn't also okay with it being done, because then it's like okay, I'm ready for something different than being out on the road every single day and like sleeping on like a blow up air mattress that's there, and it's like not always sleeping great that's there. So it was nice to kind of reset back into your life again. Is kind of how I viewed it.
Yeah. A little bit bittersweet because you've connected with so many people, and now it's like coming to an end. But maybe some of it is like creature comforts too. It's like, oh, I'm ready to go home and sleep in my bed, or like have readily available showers. No, that's totally fair. So when you finished there in Seattle, like, did you want to do more, or were you like, oh, this is good, I'm happy?
Yeah, I thought about doing more. A few people did do more, and they went into Oregon. I was doing a road trip. I had a road trip planned after that, and so I did then a road trip from Washington to Oregon, and then explored around Oregon, and then flew out. Maybe, yeah, Washington to Oregon, and then I flew out of Oregon, and then came back to Boulder.
Okay. Yeah, like I was just watching some of these videos like on YouTube for like these full journeys, and like some of them look really decrepit at the end. They're just like, and even during too, they just take days off where they like sleep at, you know, a motel or something, or a hotel, something nicer, to just get a reprieve from, you know, doing so much mileage during the day, and like doing this kind of like nonstop cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things, where especially if you're self-supporting yourself on these trips, is like recognizing, like, there are totally days that like I didn't want to like bike, but in our case you had to get to the end destination, because if you missed one day, the entire line of the leg is now messed up. And so there wasn't a question of like, can you spend more days in one place, because the answer was no, because then you wouldn't, everything would just be screwed up. And so because of that, it was a different feeling. And so sometimes I think that made it harder, because if you weren't mentally feeling it that day, it's like you still have these miles to do. And so that could be more grueling, versus if you are totally on your own schedule for things, then it is like kind of what you're saying, where it's like, yeah, it's like not feeling it today, I'm just going to stay in this area and get a motel for like an extra day, where I want to sleep in a bed, I'm going to get a motel for like one night and just kind of recover, and then continue when I'm feeling better the next day. And like having that be an option, I think is a good feeling, and is something that like makes those long solo trips, or just like long like bike packing self-supported adventures, like a little bit more tractable, and just like a little bit more nicer sometimes than needing to be at the end destination.
Yeah, people that do these trips have such a different mindset, such like a strong-willed mindset to do it for so many days in a row, because I think the commitment factor is like really important. Because like in my mind, sometimes I'm like, I romanticize like what it's like to go across the US on a bike, but like maybe like 1 or 2 days in, I'll think differently, right? I'll be like, oh, this is not so fun anymore, right? And so for someone to like stick with it for such a long period of time, that's really like just such a strong mental mindset to have. And so were you into biking when you were younger?
Towards the end of high school, a little bit. Yeah. When I grew up as a swimmer, and then my swim coach's husband was into triathlons, and that's kind of like my introduction to that area. And then I got a bike and actually started biking with him, and and like his grouping of people that he had in Ohio that he was going biking with. And so that was like the first kind of groupings of people that I did stuff with. And then I kind of continued that for a little while, did like my first triathlon with him, and then went to undergrad, and then I continued biking in undergrad, but I definitely wasn't as into it overall. Like one of my roommates was part of like the cycling club, and then they would go on like really long rides and go exploring, and that just wasn't something that I was interested in at that time. And then now it's kind of shifted, where now I've kind of more into the like going for the adventures, or just like going for the longer rides and like the mountain passes for things. And so it's kind of been this like kind of like up and down evolution over time, and sometimes I'm like not as into it and I'll switch back to other things, and then other times I get into it again, and then I kind of go full in.
Okay, so you started off in triathlon, actually, not biking.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of my thing. The biking part I thought was easier to get into, and then I just like always hated running. And so that was the hardest kind of thing to get used to. And so in undergrad, I definitely was more of a biker and a runner, I was definitely more of a swimmer and a runner, and like the biking was there but not really existent. And then now it has turned more the other way, where it's like now I'm a swimmer and a biker and sometimes a runner. Yeah.
And so for the triathlon, you say you got into it because your swim coach
Mhm.
was doing triathlons?
Swim coach's husband was doing
Swim
triathlons.
coach's husband was doing triathlons. Okay. And then so you just started like doing the multidiscipline there with him?
Yeah, I think I heard a little bit about the things that he was doing, and it was sounded interesting, and so then that was and I biked growing up and just like around the neighborhood, right, or like as transportation, but not viewing it as like a sport, or viewing it as somewhere that you can go 20 miles plus that's there. And so I think that was kind of like the very beginning of things. Took me a little bit to get into it, and like for a variety of reasons, right? It's like it does kind of hurt as you're doing it for a long time. And so it took a while to like realize how much I wanted to do. And so then it's like for me, it was like starting slow, and then like eventually joining into some of their like group rides, because people were pretty fast cyclists. And so it's like building that confidence up to the point where now it's like, okay, it's like I know what to expect if someone tells me I'm doing 20 miles, or someone tells me you're doing a century ride. And so you kind of like have that mental picture because it's something that you've done before. And I think that's that's the change in the mindset from where I was at then versus where I'm at now for things.
Yeah, and I like triathlons for that reason. It's because it is so versatile, and you can switch to something else if you're feeling not the best, or you're feeling really sore in one area. Like you can still jump into another discipline if you want. And so for your decision to sort of focus in more on the biking component there, and letting that sort of take main priority, like when you started out, were you more racing on bike, or were you more like always had this like adventure mentality to it?
Yeah, definitely not the adventure mentality for it, but not the racing either. More of just like training would be the word that I would use for it. Where it's like, yes, you're gonna like, I would go for like a 30-mile ride or a 40-mile ride and like try to like improve and like push your pace, but not necessarily for anything. It, like more for myself, and like wanting to get faster, or like being able to sustain like a longer distance ride. And I think and to be honest, that has been how I've operated like for most of my life for that side of things, where it's like I definitely am not as motivated. Like I am competitive, I think, overall, but it's like more on the training aspect is how I view things, where it's like how far can I push myself to, like, if I am competing with someone, I would want to like do well, and I like want to be able to keep up for stuff. But it's like at the end of the day, it's like what kind of training ride do I need to do in order to get to that point? Or it's like, do I need to bike 50 miles, or do I need to like bike at this pace for things? And I think that's kind of how I viewed biking, like at the beginning for things. And then now I view it more as like an adventurous type of thing, where it's like you can go and like see all these cool places. You can like put on different like wheel sets and like go to gravel places and like explore around national parks. Like that was what the bike trip across the US was also kind of teaching me, where it's like it's like really neat to be in a national park, and instead of like driving by things pretty fast, you have so much time to kind of immerse yourself in like the environment that you're there, and just like you see things that you wouldn't see necessarily in a car, because you're moving slower. And so I think that was something that I appreciate more now than I did in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy lens to have, right? Is for yourself, right? You're doing it for yourself, and you're trying to improve yourself, because ultimately that has more longevity than trying to beat out the next guy 20 like all the time, right? And I think like having that mentality of like exploring more, right? That's a really great way to think about it, because it's like if you're just racing nonstop, right? I think the accelerated rate to burnout is pretty high and pretty fast, I would imagine, if you're just doing that week after week.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. That's there. I think like I've definitely had periods where I've burned out, and then that's why I've switched to something different for a bit of time, and then eventually I'll meet someone that wants to do that activity, and then I'll get back into it, or I'll like myself get bored of like swimming or something, and then switch into something a little bit different again.
Yeah, you said Ohio there. What was it like growing up in Ohio?
Yeah, it's funny that my answer would have been way different like 4 years ago, probably then now for it. Like it was a good place to grow up. Kind of like looking back for things like my parents specifically chose that area because it had like we lived in this neighborhood, and they like when my mom's best friend was there, and then they moved there for the school system for stuff, and so like it was very nice to like grow up in that was there. There wasn't like crime, and there wasn't like a lot of like worries that were going on. It was just like your life is kind of in this area, and then like it is a little bit of a bubble, but like in a good way. I think growing up like that, you have access to like some nature, as like we like grew up with having like a wooded area, and like having not like huge acreage of land, but enough to like explore around, or just like have neighbors over, and or vice versa, and like go over to other people's houses that's there. And so just like having that space to like kind of play and like and explore around that's there. Yeah, I think it was a good place to grow up in. My childhood I think was like really nice for it. It's funny that you asked that now, because it's like, so my answer of why I would change for it, I think in the past it's like I definitely didn't appreciate like what I had like growing up for things as much as maybe I do now for it. And so I think it's easy sometimes to see like the negative side of things more so than it is to like view the positives and like how things are actually going. And so for the last like maybe like 4 years ago, or probably like 2 or 3 years ago, actually, I would always say it's like a good place to be from. And like that's usually like I met a lot of people in Ohio throughout like Oregon when I was there for a bit, and like in New Mexico, and like that was like always people's reactions is like, well, it's like I grew up in like Cleveland area, and they're like, now I'm in like New Mexico. It's like, what does that tell you? And then like people would chuckle and like move on. But like at the end of the day, and like that was I think my viewpoints for a while. But I think now I'm kind of realizing that it's like there was like a lot of positives of things that I like grew up in, and like having like growing up in that suburb of Ohio like had like a lot of really nice things that were associated with it. And so I think it's like now it's being more appreciative of that. Like sure, there's also some negatives, but like every place has the plus and minus. And so it's like instead of only seeing the negatives, it's like also seeing the positives now.
And now that you're in Boulder, and it's kind of like a different environment, or it's a different environment from Ohio there, like would you say like coming from the Midwest, maybe the outlook is like more conservative versus out here,
political wise,
or just anything,
just in
right?
general?
Just in general.
Yeah. I think it depends on where you're from in the area. It's like if I grew up in Columbus or like the city, it would have been a little bit, and like we grew up in Cleveland, my brother and I, but on the outskirts in like the suburbs of Cleveland. It was interesting because like conservative on like a political side of things, like you actually I would say growing up I was insulated from that, where you like maybe you knew, but it's like it didn't really affect like your friends in the area, and like people's viewpoints overall were like pretty. It just like wasn't a conversation topic that necessarily people had for it. I think that going back, I would notice it a little bit more depending on just like the area that I was in, but just like it definitely had more like there was a greater emphasis maybe on like a more like traditional kind of like way of life that was there. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's just like people's backgrounds more so than anything else.
Yeah, I think culturally it's just the location based there. Like I myself am from the Midwest as well, and I kind of noticed growing up that like things were pretty traditional, pretty conservative, and it was only really until coming out west here that I see like, oh, like people have completely different mindsets. Sure. And I think like you were saying earlier, like sort of coming in that bubble could be nice, like especially if you come from like a family that is like together, and they work as a team, and they're happy, and they provide a life for their kids that's really nice, and like that maybe have good school systems and environment overall, and then like coming out west, it's like, oh, okay, this is like people have completely different viewpoints, and it's like something to So something to think about, and it's like, oh, okay, like it doesn't have to be one way all the time.
Yeah, I think for me, I think I noticed the greatest change and also saw the most negatives is when I went to undergrad in Rochester, New York, and I think part of it was just also like being an undergrad that's there. It's like that was the first time that it's like my exposure to all of these different types of groups and like different types of people was much higher that's there. And so it's like you're in a dorm and like people are spread all throughout the United States or all throughout the world, like sometimes too for it. And so then you get that exposure to like different people. And I think that also, like for me, I think that's also why I noticed the difference, where it's like, here's like a grouping of like friends that I have and like viewpoints that like people have that's there. And then it's kind of making that comparison where it's like, that wasn't the case necessarily in this other community that was here, or like wasn't what I thought was the case in this other community that was here. And so I think that was when I started to like kind of like see the negatives, but at the same time I think it was like that was kind of needed to help my mindset grow a little bit, where it's like, what do I like, why do I see it as a negative, and it's like what do I want to like have my viewpoints be, and like how do I want to like interact with people. And so I think that it was like very useful for me to see like to like be able to have that like kind of comparison between the two places that's there. And like, and I think if I were to go back to Ohio, like I think it would be totally fine. That's there, and it's just like you meet people that's in your community wherever you are for it. It's just like it would be different experience. Like now when people ask me if I go back to Ohio, like the answer is probably still the same, where it's like would I move back? Probably not, but I think the rationale has like shifted, and so it's more of like I see myself like I like the mountains and like the dry environments a little bit better than the forest land. And so that's kind of like where my mentality has shifted, whereas in the past it was more of like, oh, it's like here's like all the negatives from like this childhood area, and now it's more of like, no, it's like it's like it was a fun place, and like it's like I still like the town that I grew up in for it, but I just know that it's not the area that I would choose to move to if I had like the choice.
It's fair. And I think to that, like being able to live in different places, you kind of see different people, as we said. And so you kind of create that like empathy for why people think the way they do, right? And it's like, oh, okay, like I sort of understand where you're coming from, and maybe your viewpoint is this way because you grew up in this environment, right, instead of that environment. And so like it's really great to like come sort of full circle, like as you get more and more experience, you're like, oh, okay, I have more empathy for you, even though like maybe I don't agree with your decision or your line of thought. Like it's still good to have like just that understanding between people.
Yeah What do you think? You made a comment kind of how things are like even like Midwest or like Michigan and Ohio for it. What like groupings or like things do you think that you weren't quite as exposed to where you're from in Michigan versus like now being out in Boulder for things?
That's fair. I think culturally, like there just wasn't that much like exposure to outdoor activities or like athletic groups there. I think maybe like household structure as well was very traditional, at least from what I've seen. It's like, you know, mom, dad, and child or children. Whereas coming out here, like different thoughts, like maybe people are more like entrepreneurial,
sure,
instead of like traditional industrial, right? Or maybe family units aren't specifically mom, dad, and children. Maybe it's like mom and mom, or like dad and dad, right? Or whatever variation. And I think that was very eye-opening for me.
Yeah, no, super interesting. I think it was interesting for me because I think like if I like from Ohio to New York, I think is when I like noticed that kind of like not the athleticism side quite as much, but just like the different like lifestyles that's there for it. And then from New York to Boulder is like the athleticism side and more like the individualism side. But I would say like those two places in terms of like overall thought is like kind of similar. And just like how they're like, at least especially from like a political side, I think, and like how people are thinking in those two like fronts overall.
Yeah, but overall, I think it's good to have, and now you sort of understand, like when you go back to where you were, you're like, okay, like I get why this was the way it was. It works in this way, but that's not to say there isn't another working solution elsewhere as well. Circling back to like growing up, like what was it like growing up like as like twins, because I think that's really really amazing, right? Like how like that's such a like a different dynamic that not a lot of people have.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting question for it. It's funny because it's like I want to know what it's like from the other side for it, and so it's like I have some opinions of what it would be like from the other side, but different. I think I can say the main difference is like, even if you're siblings with someone else, it's like, yeah, you're growing up together, that's there. But I think one of the bigger differences between like people that are twins, whether you're identical or like even fraternal, is like your life is more shared. That's there. And just like by default, like you're the same exact age, you're going through the same like school system at the same time in the same classes, that's there. And so instead of it being like a like independent kind of exploration of your life, it's like for the first, I don't know, like in my case it was like, well, in my case it's been for the first 28 years that has been being in the same place, and that has like a lot of advantages to it. And so it's like you don't have to guess whether or not someone like understands you, or like yes, you change over time for it, but then like someone else is changing at the same time, and like seeing each of those like subtle changes over the course of your life. And I think that's one of the things that I've like found very valuable behind things, is having that like connection with someone else there. It's like it's hard, and it's a connection that you can really only have from like having that proximity with someone for like your entire life that's there. And so it's like eventually you can, like if I was like married with someone that's there, it's like, yes, you're with someone for a really long time overall, but at the same time it's like it's different because you're living separate lives versus like being a twin. I think as a lot of times is things are more combined, and like not always, but for the case of like my brother and I, it's like we did the same things for it. And so it's like a lot of times like the thought process was more of like, it's like responding to a story and saying we instead of I for it. And so it's like if I didn't have a sibling, it probably would always be I, because it was just me that was in that time, versus like my brother and I always having the same types of experience. And so then it becomes like we that's there. And so I think that's been one of the more like strong takeaways that's there. So like I think lots of positives from having that side of things. It's also interesting because I think more recently it's like, where is that, like at what point is it more like you're individuals and like separate for it? And so it's funny because usually when you grow up, if someone does have twins and you like enter the same school system, which usually you're always doing, they'll usually separate twins like as much as they can within the classes, with the emphasis of like having people develop individually, just because having that joint dynamic is like great. But at the end of the day, it's like without also feeling like you're an individual, then it's like a different type of like interplay and dynamic that goes on behind the scenes there. And I think that's something that like currently, like for my brother and I at least, is like the next stage will probably be more like the like more growing towards the independent stage, just because if you're not in the same place as someone else, you are like acting more individual. And we've had that in the past of like both of us going to different internships, and so it's like going apart for the summertime, having like this individual lifestyle and individual experiences that the other person has probably heard about but like didn't live them themselves for it, which kind of changes the dynamic and like changes how you see things that's there.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think like as you said earlier, like judging motives, right? Like, because you just don't know what other people's motives are. And having grown up with a twin, maybe you know them a lot more. Like, you know them a lot better than just some random stranger that you met, or even like closer than a close friend, perhaps. so that motives is very helpful as you carry on, and you're like, okay, well, I'm stuck here. Could you help me? Could you help me, essentially? And then you know that like the motive behind it is not something that they can get something from you in return, but rather it's like a genuine response, like, okay, like I see it like this, you don't have to agree, but I think like you can travel in this direction and you'll get a better result, essentially.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the town that we're from in Aurora, the next door town is called Twinsburg, Ohio, and then they got their claim to fame because they have it was founded by a set of twins, I believe. And then they have this festival. It's called like Twins Day every single year, where like thousands of sets of twins come into Twinsburg, Ohio for this specific festival, and people use it for a variety of reasons. So it's like, it's also nice to have, if you're like separated in different places, it's nice to have like this one common place that you kind of meet up, reconnect, and just like chat. And it's like just like kind of a unique experience having like thousands of sets of twins that's already there. But I think one of the other advantages there is it's usually easy to chat with people that are there just because someone else has lived that shared experience. And I think it's hard for someone to kind of, I think, fully grasp like what does that mean, or like what kind of like relationship does that build when you are always with someone else. It's always like a we kind of answer for it. And so those types of like environments is nice because you don't have to explain to someone like why that is, because it's just naturally assumed because someone else already lived it, more so than anything else.
And so this is like an event that happens annually?
Yep. Yeah, annually. It's like the first week of August, I think, is usually when it ends up occurring. But yeah, it's just like that's the town's kind of claim to fame, or once a year they have this event that goes on. And that's it's always kind of wild for people that live in the town, because you're maybe just like working at Home Depot, and then the next thing you know, for like 3 days is just like you see hundreds of sets of twins that are coming in, which is like usually not normal for an area.
Do they have to be like do they have to be identical or like fraternal?
Nope, it could be whatever, right? So it could be identical or fraternal. There's like a lot of not a lot, but there's a decent number of like research kind of like events that happen around that area. And so just because it's like has this gathering, and so it'll be like people from the FBI that like want to look at, I don't know, like I don't know if you can do like fingerprint testing kind of thing, or if it's like you doing like personality types, or it's like why is one person a specific personality than the other, and then like how do you adapt to that over time for it, or if someone has an illness and the other person doesn't, and like having those types of like in nature versus nurture kind of studies that goes on behind the scenes that's there.
That's really interesting. Like I've never been to that before, but it sounds like it sounds like it's a really great event for like people to just like get to know each other, and like, oh, like I know what you're going through, and you know, same thing about me. Do you think between like twins it ever gets like competitive?
Yeah. I think it does depend, but I think naturally that like almost as an artifact, I think somewhat of growing up, where there's always inherently a comparison that's there, because you are doing like, especially if you are doing the same things. And so for instance, for my brother and I, we were doing the same things, and so it would always like, it might not be said, but it's a very different type of experience when you know you're like both swimming, and like for instance, like the best example that I have is like both of us swam, and then Austin was a better swimmer than I am, and like still is overall for it. And there's not like maybe some friends would make a comparison sometimes, but it's not like within the family there's a comparison, but it is a little bit implicit. And like I think the best example is when like at the end of high school, they would do their state meets, and so depending on like how good you were, or like what the team kind of you were on, you may or may not make it to the state. And so I didn't, because I wasn't that great for it. But it's a very different type of experience to be an individual and not make it to state versus versus being a twin and having Austin made it to state. And so not only did I not make it to state, but now I'm going to support him because he made it to state. That's there. And so it's like no one's making a direct comparison about me not making it there, but it's hard to sometimes not like implicitly be thinking that myself and like have this like comparison like section that's there. And I think for like it has a lot of positives also have it be like that. And so like some of the directions that I took in undergrad like was because I saw like Austin going a specific way, and I like saw that as something being valuable and something that I wanted to kind of like explore myself and seek out. And then that gave me opportunities to do other things. And so like the competition has its benefits that's there, but it's also I think sometimes more of a humbling experience overall, where it's like you wouldn't, that like specific type of interaction is more niche, and so it's you wouldn't necessarily have that of just being siblings with each other. You like would have to be the same age and doing the same exact thing that's there. And I think it kind of comes inherent to like people being twins sometimes.
That's like wild pressure, right? And like wild non-explicit pressure, wild implicit pressure, right? Because it's like, yeah, nobody ever says it, right? Because like you don't really socially do that, right? You don't just be like, oh, I did this and you didn't do that, or I did this, and yeah. But just that implicit pressure is like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I need to keep up, or like I feel like he needs to keep up, like whatever the direction may be. And I think, like you said, like it's like a pro in that like it's a driver for both people, right? It's like, okay, like how can we better one another, right? Like can we better one another in this sport, for example? Or the other way it comes around is like, oh, like I didn't make this and now I like don't feel as good, right? Just in general. But you know, at the end of the day, like yeah, it's just about how you think about it and like what you think about inside, like why, like does this, how does this pressure, like how will I let this pressure impact me?
Yeah, I totally agree with you for it. I think it took me a while to get better with that and like come to terms with it, because it sucks to like lose, or it sucks to like not to get the things that you want to, and then it like sucks more to like lose not to get things you want to, and then go support someone that that you were doing the same stuff with that did get the things that you wanted to, that's there. But I think that also is like a nice, it was a bad experience in some ways, but it was like a good experience in other ways of just like being able to realize of like kind of taking a step back and like can you be happy for someone for achieving like their own things when you're in that same direction and you didn't get something that's there. And I think like it definitely pops up towards like friends or just like relationships, I think in general as well, but like maybe not quite as apparent that's there. And so I think it was like I think being just like a twin in general, there's a lot of like good like learning things over time for it, and like things that I think that I probably don't take that I take a little bit for granted because that was my experience like growing up with, whereas someone else looking in probably would like be surprised or see something like way differently than I would just by default of like not having that shared experience.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and I have no idea what that's like at all, but you know, probably the closest thing I can imagine would be like close friends, right, or like teammates doing well, and I'm not doing well, and like trying to figure out why, or like having like resentful feelings on inside. But like ultimately you know like where you really grow is like, okay, we're on the same team, right? And it's like, oh, okay, like I should be happy for your success, and hopefully the other way around too, you'd be happy for my success. And yeah, I think like that is like a really humbling experience for sure, and like it sucks in the moment, but you know, I'm sure there's things that you do that like, you know, the other person might not be able to catch up with, right? And then like how do you think they feel, right? But I think like you're saying, yeah, for sure, like it's on a whole different level if it's, you know, your own like twin sibling, right? Yeah,
no, I totally agree with you. It's like I wonder if you do get to the point where you are like, if you're in something and that someone else is like, whether that's like a partner or like a really close friend that's there, it's like you can be super supportive of someone else, but I feel like a lot of times in the back of your mind, it's like it is implicit that you didn't get something that you wanted, or like you didn't get something that they had for it. So it's like, can you ever get to the point where you're happy for them, but not recognizing that you yourself didn't get that thing? It was my comment.
And that's hard. That is how you grow, right? And it is like through tough like situations, right? And like that. And it's not like just easy, right? If it was easy, I think everybody would have achieved it, or like, would have done it. And so, yeah, I think that's really great for growth overall, if you're able to recognize and you can overcome that. Yeah. So yeah, for your undergrad there, what drew you to engineering?
Yeah, interesting question. I didn't start out actually in engineering for things. So the reason why I looked in Rochester is we didn't. I guess I should say I instead for things. And so both my brother and I were looking at similar places, but a lot of the places were within, all of the places actually were within driving distance of like where I grew up in Ohio. And so Rochester is only 4.5 hours from like my hometown Aurora in Ohio, and so that put it into the range. But I actually didn't look at Rochester like RIT at the beginning. And the reason we went out to Rochester, New York, was for the University of Rochester, and they had like a student welcome day that was there, and so that drew me out to there because I was looking at doing like a major in biotechnology. Was like the area that I was like most interested in, because I like the biology side growing up in high school for things, and then I was just like looking at what was around, and it's like, well, it'd be kind of cool to do lab work or like do genetic engineering kind of thing. And so that was like my push. And then RIT actually was one of the only programs that had like biotechnology around, and so that was kind of how that school popped up on the radar to a certain extent. And then when we were visiting University of Rochester, it's literally it's right across the river and right next door, and so it didn't really make sense to like not see that university that was there. And then visited that university, found that they had the biotechnology program, and it was just something that like seemed like it would be a decent fit overall for things. And so that was kind of my top choice. Ended up going there and then did biotechnology for the first year. And it was kind of like a niche, like small program that was there. Like made a lot of like good friends that first year through that program, just because you're in class with like this program of 15 or like 20 people total that's there per year level. And so that was kind of my starting points. But then the problem that I had is that I learned that I liked the biology side and I found it fascinating, but it got boring for me fast. And especially because I did this tour of started with an R, but it was this cancer biology lab, like research institute that was nearby. And so it was like me and a grouping of the students like went and toured, and it was basically like, see what things can you do with this major that's there. And then I like got to see what they did, and then my like result coming back was like, I don't know if I can see myself doing that every single day. And it's like, it's like, well, what do I get into next for things? And at that time, Austin was doing more like engineering focused stuff, and so I like knew what he was kind of learning and like doing things, and I always kind of liked the math, science and like STEM side of things. And so then I was going to try to get into biomedical engineering, because it's like now I'm combining the biology side, I'm combining like the engineering science side. It's kind of like the happy medium between the two. And so that was what I was applying for. But the biomedical engineering program in Rochester was new, and so they had a cap for the number of students that they would accept, especially like students transferring into the department. And so when I went to talk to the people, it wasn't guaranteed that I would get entry into that program. And so that wasn't a great feeling, because it's like, well, I know I'm not happy here, but I know I don't have a for sure answer of getting into this program. And so I needed a program that had space available for it. And in Rochester at RIT, there's this program called like microelectronics engineering, and that program only had like 7 or 8 people in it. And then like when I talked to the department head, it's like, well, it's like, yeah, it's like, of course you can like come into it. It's like we would like totally be happy taking you. And so I signed up for that. Originally as like a backup plan, and then got into the biomedical engineering, and then decided to just like do both of them at the same time that was there, and just double major instead. And then like both biomedical and then the microelectronic engineering. Ended up working out. Like I'm glad that I did it that way. The biomedical engineering program was a little bit like, it was new at Rochester, so they're still kind of learning like what works and what doesn't work for things, whereas the microelectronic engineering program was around for like 50 years or 40 years, and so there was like pretty established, had like really good space, and I got to learn things that I don't think I would have even like thought about or like been interested in before joining that program. And like that was had its pluses and minuses. Like it had a lot of minuses at the beginning, because people like sometimes you kind of take for granted what other people know versus what you know. And so I went in like really not knowing anything about the major, and then people would be saying these like terms that I just like had no idea. And then but then I get the vibe that this is like a very key like term and technology like thing that I think I should know. And then it's me asking questions about like, oh, I actually I've never heard that before, and like don't know that. It's like I need like a little bit more help here. And so it's like starting from scratch, and then like really entering into this program, which was really rewarding overall for it. And so that was my path into engineering, through kind of like a like not probably the ideal way to choose your major in school.
No, and I think that's an important aspect too, right? Like some people are like, oh, I build things and I put things together, that's why I'm engineering. And that's like stereotypical, right? But I think you need diversity in any field, and engineering is just a field that needs diversity, I think. And having like different backgrounds and people, I think really adds to the conversation and adds to the field rather than take away.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that is kind of where I'm at now, like having these two areas that I did in the past, and then now being in mechanical engineering. I think this has been really valuable of me, like having like the different conversations with people, and like people at like very different like perspectives and how they see things, and then kind of taking that with me to where I'm at now for things.
And so you said you started out in biotech.
Yep.
And is sort of was one of the considerations for healthcare with all this?
Yeah, I think when I was looking into biomedical engineering, the healthcare is kind of what jumped out of things. For the biotechnology, I think like cancer biology and like that research area was something of interest to me, especially after seeing like the lab, even though I knew I wouldn't be happy day in, day out, but like from like the technology standpoint and like just like interest, that was something that like just seemed very fascinating and had a lot of avenues to go down. And then the genetic engineering side was the other thing that was interesting. So there was like RIT had this joint program with the Malaysian government, and so a decent amount of students were from Malaysia, and like they were interested in genetic engineering, right, of like making these like crops that are resistant to like heat, more like heat tolerant, or like more like resistance to like insects that's there. And so that's kind of like the other subsection of things. And so that also I found interesting as well. And so I would have probably either gone into one of those routes if I were to have done the biotechnology side of things.
Okay. And so now, like, have you sort of looked into like a research area that you really enjoy?
It's funny, I've kind of shied away from that like a little bit. Like I think what really interested me in the biotech and the biomedical engineering was I kind of wanted what I would work on to be somehow related to like human health, or like somehow related to like improving healthcare, or like improve something that had like a human like interest to it, and like it had a benefit overall, versus like developing a product that maybe get used by people, but is it like at the end of the day the product is making the company money, and so it's like that didn't have quite the same kind of like good feeling I think about it at the beginning. It's funny how it's shifted a little bit, because now I think I'm in the viewpoint of I like tackling interesting problems, and so I would love for something to be more like human focused, and like think that what I'm doing has like a potentially like positive impact in like someone's life, or like has the potential to be like a positive impact on healthcare or like human health in general. But I think I think now I've realized that as long as I find the problem fascinating or like interesting from like a more technology or like physics standpoint, I could be engaged with it for like a few years at a time, and then switch to a different problem that's there. And so having that healthcare realm of things is just something that I'm kind of in currently, but not something that I've really been like pushing hard towards overall.
And so when you say more like people-centric type work, is that more like directly working with people, or are you okay with more like indirect?
More indirect.
Okay.
I don't think I would ever do like patient studies or clinical studies or things. I think kind of where I would like, if I'm working on a and I don't have a great example for it, but it'd be like if I'm working for like Medtronics is like the example that comes to mind, where they make like a lot of like electronic and like biomedical side of things, and they're actually based in they have an office in Boulder for things. And so that is where I would feel like I'm taking like a technology problem, but what the product is being used for is going into like humans, or like be helping like human health, or like helping healthcare. And so like that indirect route I think is kind of where I feel more satisfied, of just like what I'm doing matters, is I guess kind of where I like to, or has the potential to matter, is where I like to kind of be in.
And currently now you're more into like the microfluidics and like the lab on a chip studies, is that right?
Yep. And so it's like lab on a chip is like how do you move fluid flow through, or blood, or it could be water, or it could be some reagent, but how do you move it through small channels? And then the reason why you might want to do that is because you can make tests more sensitive, or you can take like the ideal situation. And it's like the movie, and like the Theranos is the best example for it, right? Where they went, not a good example, but like that technology kind of dream of like, can you take a drop of blood and then do this massive processing where you can test for hundreds of different diseases all at the same time, or like test for like a complete blood test with this like little droplet of blood. I think that's like the dream goal of microfluidics and like lab on a chip like technologies overall. I would say there's a reason that it hasn't happened yet, because there's a lot of problems, and like that's what makes it interesting, I think, from a science standpoint, is like you have like, if it worked, then there'd already be products out that like develop that, but it doesn't work. And so it's like, what do you do to try to push the bar further to get to that point where these technologies do exist? Because if it can exist and you can have something working, then the potential benefit to like humanity in general is quite large and like quite massive, and would like change how you would like view healthcare in general. And so instead of needing to go to a centralized lab that's someone's taking your blood, and then it's being processed, and then you get your results back later, and that's great if you have access to it. But then if you don't have access to it, and you're in a rural place, you're in a place that just doesn't have that infrastructure, then having this really cheap plastic chip that can do all of this kind of locally, now you can just really increase the access to healthcare. And so that's, I think, kind of like the dream behind things with that.
And the timeline too is so much faster. Like if this became a reality, or if you can actually get it into the hands of people that maybe don't have that much means, or are more impoverished, like they can expedite that timeline much faster in getting the results. And that's really great for them too, to know, exactly what is going on in their body.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. Like diagnostic side, I think is super useful. It's been interesting because the longer that I've kind of been in this space for, like, usually it's not as common for companies to take on these biomedical projects because there's a lot of risk associated with it, especially going through like regulatory approval to actually have a device come up and working. And even if you do get regulatory approval, usually the companies will split and have like a biomedical like division, because if something goes wrong and someone sues you, you don't want your entire company to go under. You want the biomedical like realm of it to go under. And so there's like all these logistical hurdles behind the scenes that's just like affecting why there's not as much progress made. But it turns out like the diagnostic side, if you're in like a food processing plant and you want to know if there's E. coli in your area, that is an easier regulatory step to jump into that kind of field, and like same kind of technology, but different application and like less regulation in that space. And so that has been kind of the more interesting side of things right now for me, is just like seeing, it's like if you pumped all like billions of dollars into something, you probably can come up with a solution, but then it's like logistically in like the modern world, what are the like kind of hurdles that you have to jump to be able to actually make a product or to be able to get the regulatory approval for whatever you're trying to do or whatever your idea is.
Yeah, and especially like I think with our current process now, you have to send it to a lab, like a big lab somewhere, and they run the diagnostics, and it might take weeks and weeks and just whatever, a long period of time. Maybe not everybody has that time, right? And whatever they're trying to discover about their health. And so with your research now, are you looking to test for like a specific disease, or are you looking to test for all disease?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny because it's like I am in this microfluidic lab and a chip space for things, but it's like the comment before of like, am I directly in it, where you're like working with cells, you're working with like cancer biology and that side of things, or is it in the indirect side? I'm definitely in the indirect side in this sense for things. And so only recently have I been more interested in like the biology side and like what happens when you use proteins or using blood in like the type of systems that I'm like developing. And like the very beginning of all of my kind of like PhD and just like work here has just been more on like understanding like a more physics side of things, and like how does like the devices that we're making actually work, and like how can you make these small micro pumps that go into these channels to move fluid around, whether that's water or blood. But on a research standpoint, if you're using human blood, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to doing that, and so it's way easier to demonstrate something for blood. But it's like your end application is still biology, but without actually testing it for blood, is it actually valid for it? And so that's the stage that I'm in now for things where it's like I've done all this work for kind of proof of concept and just like showcasing things with water and like nice like clean fluids and like easy things to use. And so now the question is that analogy work to transfer to like more biological fluids like blood? That's a little bit harder on a regulatory side and just like harder in general to use into the systems.
Yeah. And so I'm hearing like blood as like a really good application tester, right? Is blood like the only thing you're testing for? Like I guess you're saying you're starting out with water, and maybe like a little bit of easier fluids, but ultimately is the application, like I know the application can be vast, but like trying to apply it to a human like you and I, like are you testing for all fluids within the human, or just more like strictly on blood?
Yeah, sure. So I think how I would view things and like my kind of like goal application would be kind of like building these small pumps and then using specifically blood, but then like within the blood you have like the red blood cells, you have the white blood cells, and you have like platelets. And so it's like filtering in the blood and then separating it into these different components that's there, and then sending those components, and then you have like the plasma, and it's like those components are then what you're using to test with. And so using blood always as your base fluid, just because that by itself is more biologically relevant, because you can test once you have someone's like sample of blood, you can do so many things with that and understand so much about just like how is their nutrition from like their metabolites that's inside of the blood, and like, or like, does someone have sickle cell, right, from looking at like red blood cells that's there, and then like cancer biology through like the white blood cells that's there. And so you have access to so much information if you can process with blood. And so I think that's why I've kind of honed in on that specific type of biological fluid, because it has like such a large amount of information that you can glean from processing that specific fluid.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Like blood is probably like one of the main fluids that you want, and to get all this information from somebody, right? But it's just like in terms of solving problems with it, I know that you mentioned perhaps like cancer, or like other physical ailments that you may have, but does it ever dip into like what I was reading was like, oh, we're trying to solve like for HIV, for example, or like these transmitted diseases. Would you say you're more general with your findings, like what you're solving for, and the information you're trying to glean from your blood, or are you more targeted towards one specific disease?
Yeah, I see what you're asking for. I think for me and currently things that I'm doing right now, it's more taking even like a further step back and just being like, can you use blood? And like use it, and less of an application.
Okay.
And so it's more of like the fundamental question, where it's like, before you have the application, can you actually even flow blood, or could you flow urine, or could you flow these biological fluids through the system? Because if the answer is no, it's a showstopper for that end application space that's there.
Okay. And I was going to ask you about the Theranos one, and I know, you know, it didn't end very well, and there's a lot of complications and issues and within that story there, but I think the concept is the dream, right, for all researchers going through it. And like, what do you think as a researcher going through that same process that you're trying to achieve with Theranos? Like, what do you think, like, is there longevity within that research?
Yeah, I think for most researchers, the answer, I think, is yes, where it's like you're making progress towards like that end goal for things. I think one of the interesting things that I've kind of heard and or noticed a little bit is specifically within this like lab on a chip space, like after Theranos failed majorly, there's a lot of skepticism in this field, where if you come to someone with this idea and you say, I'm going to test for 10 diseases at a time with a droplet of blood, it immediately rings red flags and like a lot of alarm bells. And so it's hard to get funding actually now for some things that are like that. And so it affected the funding space a little bit, and a little bit of like the potentials, because now that the funding space is a little bit affected, it's going to be harder to make progress towards that goal. And I think everyone realizes that if you have something that can do something like that significant, it's like the impact is huge, that's there. But it's like, how do you convince people that what you're doing is not going to fail or is not going to be like a fraud? And that is when the story gets a little bit more complicated, I think, to like pitch your ideas.
Yeah, and that's really unfortunate, right? Because they were doing so well, and there was a lot of trust within them, and then all of a sudden that trust was broken, and now for researchers coming up, like the trust is sort of broken with them too, as we've seen with the funding situation, where they're not getting as much. Like, I don't know if that's fair, right? For the researchers coming up, that they get discounted just because of a major case.
Yeah, I think it changes it changes just the storytelling, right, for it, where it's like, eventually, like, what people are going to be more sensitive towards, and so what you're pitching might just be a little bit more cautious, or like, right, or like that side of things, where like the funding has definitely changed a little bit, just from my like understanding and looking into things. But is it significantly pulled back? I don't think fully, because there is realization that like if something has the potential, then there is usually funding that's available for it. It's just now there's more like concern about like if you say specific things that are aligned with Theranos for it, you probably don't want to put that into your proposal, or you want to be very careful with your wording behind that system, because you don't want to overpromise something that maybe like isn't able to be feasibly achieved that's there. And so I think that's kind of where things have changed the most, where there's just a little bit more caution behind how you're spinning your story and what kind of like funding proposal you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that like a financial component is part of the whole process, right? Because what you're trying to do is so good, right? And it's so like positively impactful for society, right? Where you get to speed up and accelerate the rate in which they understand their own health through their own blood, for example. And to have something like this like defund your research there, that's really unfortunate for like, yeah, just like the end consumer like not having this product. And especially like, you know, maybe in like a more developed, more affluent nation that maybe they still have the tech and the healthcare system that can get their results that they're looking for, or can get their question that they have about their health answered. But like for some of these countries, like the third world, like undeveloped nations there, like it would be really great if they got something like this lab on a chip, like they can test so quickly and efficiently and sort of know within a really short period of time like what their body is telling them essentially.
No, I totally agree with you for that. I think it's the time game. It's kind of an interesting question overall, because it's like how long, like it's like, should you invest money in something that's going to take maybe 50 years or like 25 years to have the outcome for it? And then how do you maintain having like cash flow going into something like that? Because I think kind of one of the things that I've kind of view, whereas if you have enough money and you invest enough money into something, and like there's like tons of super smart people, you can usually figure out like to overcome challenges, and like, right, like the Manhattan Project is like I think a great example of that side of things, where it's like if cash isn't an obstacle, you can usually achieve the goal that you want out of it. But if cash is the obstacle, then it's like, how do you still make progress towards the things that's there? And I think that's when it kind of becomes tricky, and how to navigate that space.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think it's just us, right? It all comes back to us, and like money is a part of the equation. But, you know, if you really need it, if you really need to solve a certain problem, like then the money is not really part of the equation anymore, right? It's becoming more like, I have to solve this problem because I'm going through this situation, or I have this disease, or my family has this disease, and I'm really trying to solve it.
Yeah, and I think like kind of what you're saying for that, it's starting to shift a little bit, where I think especially like like with COVID, I think it has shifted people's viewpoints more into like the biological realm for things, where it's like, you know, it's like these like diseases, and just like understanding the biology side of things, and like having diagnostic tools that can rapidly like detect diseases is super important. And I think that argument doesn't have to be said to anyone as much anymore, like as maybe it did necessarily in the past when you didn't have that in mind. And it's like, now that things are more on people's forefront, I think there is a lot more funding and like research going into those specific fields for like diagnostic testing, and how do you like make sure that you can do this quickly, or you can like send this off to any country and have someone be doing like the same diagnostic testing that's there as well.
And so with your stage in your study right now, what is your specific like topic question trying to solve?
Yeah, I think so I really got into this space of like, it started off when I was in an internship at Hewlett Packard, and then I've kind of like, I took a vested interest, to be honest, in like some of how their technology worked, and then I've been taking it in a different I've been taking it in like a larger size scale than what they are doing at Hewlett Packard, but like similar-ish directions. And so someone like how a printer works is you basically have these little channels, and then you want to print a piece of paper, and then you have ink that's kind of being deposited onto the paper. But then I think what a lot of people sometimes don't know is that every single time a droplet comes out of your printer, it turns out there's actually a bubble that's forming, and that bubble is what's pushing out a droplet of ink and then hitting the paper. And then you repeat this millions of times, and then you have your page that has whatever graphic or whatever text that you wanted to deposit on. And then what they found out is that you can take that same bubble and put it into a channel and then use that as a pump source instead. And so kind of my research then is taking these like micro bubbles and then figuring out what can we actually do with them. And so pumping is like one way of doing it, like droplet ejection, right? Like a printer is another way of doing it. But where there's not a lot of research right now is like what biological things can we do with this, like this integrated micro pump that's there. And so what my kind of research aim is at looking at like what happens when you put blood in, what happens when you cascade a lot of these different devices together, and like what kind of applications can you enable by using this kind of base technology. And so it's like very much in the more foundation stage right now, which is kind of what I think makes it exciting. Whereas now what applications are the most promising to potentially go down even further.
Yeah, that application there with the blood. And so you're saying similar to like a printer, you're pushing a bubble of blood?
So what's interesting for almost all biological fluids are mostly water for it. And so that's why using water is sometimes a good analogy test, because if you can get, so how it ends up working is you heat up a little bit of the fluid, and then that fluid vaporizes. And so it's like boiling water on your stovetop that's there. And so you get this bubble that forms just like you would to boil water on a stove. But in this case, only one bubble is going to form. And so that one bubble is what is then going to kind of expand out and then collapse back down again. And that's what's pushing in this water, or that's what would be pushing blood around the channel that's there.
And so, like, is it similar at all with a printer, like in which you're trying to print something with blood?
You could. So I think one of the reasons why people like this technology, or why I think it has some use, is that you eventually need a way to get the fluid out of the system that's there. And what's nice is that if you use the same technology that's in an inkjet printer, you kind of get that by default, because it's already designed to eject out some kind of fluid. And so if you have like fluid A and then like fluid B, and you want to mix them together, and then you want to like analyze the result of that, it's easy to get it out. Whereas in other systems, it might be harder to kind of get that end product out of your system and then be able to analyze it in the real world.
Okay. And so like when you do like print this out or whatever that you have pushed out, like are you trying to analyze anything specific?
I think the end goal would be yes for it. Like a lot of times if you need to, like, it's like kind of testing for COVID, right? Where it's like you have spit or you have like some saliva, and then you have this, like, they call it reagents, but it's basically something that's going to react with your spit and then turn a color, right? It turn something's just drip red if it detects a very specific antigen or like specific part of like the COVID-19 virus that's inside of that spit that's there. And so that's kind of how a lot of this would work, where you would have these like this mixture, and then you need to mix it together, and then you need to care about what the end result is. And so if you want to test for COVID-19, you would want to mix these two things together. If you want to maybe test for HIV, you would maybe want to mix something different together that's going to test for it. And so, but at the end of the day, you need to know what that end mixture was. And so that's where the kind of removing it from the system and like ejecting it back out again would become useful.
So it's more of like the mechanism and the process of doing it rather than like looking at the individual disease.
Yep. Yeah. I think for me, that was where I'm not in the biology space as fully. And I think I have had a greater appreciation for how complicated things get, because it's one thing to say, I've made something that can route blood around. But then it's a totally different thing if you're saying I made something that can detect HIV, or I made something that can detect sickle cell disease. And like that jump from just base application to actually having it be detecting and diagnostic is quite large is kind of what I found. And so you could spend years on and people do spend years like specifically on HIV for just like understanding and like how do you build tools that are specifically designed to target that specific virus more than anything else. And so I think that would be really interesting to explore into, but I've had to be a little bit more realistic, I think, with like my work here, where it's like with the time that I have, is there enough time to go down into that rabbit hole, or do I need to stay in this more like safer realm where it's easier to come up with just these like quick application studies and whether or not it actually works to use fluid inside of this system?
Like moving beyond this, do you think you'll be pushing more in the field of healthcare? Like after this, like would you say this is sort of like a slush phase of engineering, like hard STEM engineering and healthcare, and then in the future would you say would you like to get more into like more pure healthcare space?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for it. I think because that's kind of relates into what do I want to do next with things. And so that is like pure healthcare, pure like biology side of things is something that I wouldn't say is my strong, like it's totally not my strong suit for things, but it's a really interesting space. And it's also a complementary space, because if I have this knowledge, I can bridge the gap from like what I'm doing now to actually having it being applied for something that's there. And so I would find that really interesting to like explore in the future for things.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like, I think being able to draw these applications like solving for HIV or sickle cell, I think that's really amazing, right? And that is the end result of a lot of different moving pieces. And having like the mechanical component of that moving piece, like just understanding like the routing and like how to actually move this blood around, right? That's a huge component, and ultimately it's a necessary component. It's a critical component for what you're trying to solve. And so like that is very interesting on its own. But yeah, like you said, like actually realizing it and be like, oh, okay, like we can solve this part of cancer, or we can prevent like the timeline of the growth of this cancer, or like we can prevent some really dangerous disease from forming. Like that's amazing.
Yeah, I think application has a lot of promise, but it's just not quite there yet.
Fair enough. Cool. Well, Brandon, I think you're an amazing person to begin with, and I think like the causes that you're driving for and like the opportunities that you're trying to give, younger people, I think that's very noble. And I think just having like that mindset, like that adventurous mindset, I think is really amazing. And like whatever you choose to do next, I hope that you find it enjoying, and like I hope you're happy.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So well, yeah, thank you for coming by.
Cool. Yeah, great chatting.
Cool. Awesome.